Hi everyone, Tracy DW here. My learning journey about the topic of the British Empire and Britain's colonial past has always been about exploring people and events that could be hidden or overlooked, exploring these from a different angle and modelling the use of historical inquiry through a thought process that asks questions and examines events within a wider context in relation to my own prior knowledge and life experience. One of the things that I have realised on this learning journey is that history is never completely about the past. History happens all around us. It is made every single day. At this particular point in time, now more than ever before, we need to ask the question, is history a matter of fact or perspective? For my co-learners who listen to my podcast episodes and follow my work, you all know that this has been my strapline from the very beginning. History is not necessarily about what is true and constitutes as fact, but what perspective or whose perspective is valued. Whatever perspectives are valued are those that, over time, are represented as being valid. The Duke of Sussex autobiography, Spare, is an intense study of how history is written and also reveals history's problematic nature in the need to question everything that we are told, holding a magnifying glass up to the narratives that have always been accepted and apply a fine-tooth comb to assess how valid are the sources from which they originate. Although Spare is an autobiography of the son of a monarch, why is its reliability as a source being called into question and denied? Is it because the book reveals the presence of an ideology where credibility should have priority over reality? That in order for events to be of historical merit, they must be embellished, contrived, and manipulated in some way? That history is solely about representation, who is focused on, how they are portrayed, and what is their bestowed significance. But most importantly, Spare is not only about how history is written, but ultimately who gets to write history, because, as I have always said, whoever gets to write history controls the narrative, and Spare depicts this struggle for control of the narrative and who should prevail: the media, the establishment, or the individual. Throughout time, the portrayal and existence of the monarchy has always relied on sources to convey an official narrative. In previous centuries, merit and capabilities were just as important as maintaining appearances. Official narratives were recorded through records and proclamations and word of mouth in tandem with superstition and Chinese whispers. This would all work to transport the monarch into a mythical and godlike status, but this status was always precarious, and we have seen this throughout the history of monarchy, where one bloodline is exiled or abdicates, dies out or is deposed, and a new bloodline begins. In the not too distant past, rights to the throne were determined through warfare and bloodshed, the survival of the strongest and the fittest, and declaring divine rights also dictated the narrative and made everything clear-cut. In the present, press offices, royal correspondents and courtiers all seek to control the narrative through proxy wars on behalf of individual members of the royal family. Wars which are played out on social media and in the press, where conflict is waged for the rights to popularity and the limelight. All this against the backdrop of an ancient hierarchy where everyone must know their place and keep their place, and allow this hierarchy to dominate and dictate the family dynamic and perceptions held by society, even to the detriment of individuals. You must never shine too brightly or outshine your superiors, even though the Bible says never to dim your light. It is a sin to do so. What is the ideology behind the monarchy? It is protocol and tradition that plays the role of the blind man who cannot see, who is without a vision and unable to guide this institution into a new era where it must make the transition and transform into an entity capable of managing society's expectations in remaining relevant, relatable and realistic. Even though the capacity of the monarchy has changed constitutionally over the centuries, its purpose remains the same as it has always been: to maintain power over its subjects and ensure the continuation of that power for those who also work in association with it. As Harry retells the negative and disparaging narrative of race and class that has built up around his spouse, I ask myself the question, what is it all for? Catherine of Aragon, Anne of Denmark, Sophia Dorothea of Seal, Charlotte of Mecklenburg, Queen Victoria, Alexandra of Denmark, Mary of Teck, and the late Queen Mother Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. I wonder what all those queens of the past would have to say about the idea of the English rose. In the course of British history, there has never been a requirement for any Queen of England to be English. The origins of each of these women would have come from a range of ethnic traits and characteristics originating from a vast pool of ancestry, both recorded and unrecorded. There has been no requirement for a Queen or Duchess of the British throne to be either English or a rose. A woman's race, nationality or class has rarely been an essential prerequisite for continuing any royal bloodline. We have simply become entrenched and trapped within the confines of the social constructs that we have defined for ourselves. So, for Prince Harry, who is controlling his narrative, and when did his narrative begin? His narrative began way before his birth on the 15th of September 1984 and before the marriage of his parents at St Paul's Cathedral on the 29th of July 1981. His narrative began at that exact moment when it became apparent that his father's soulmate was not Harry's mother. The prince may have become aware for the first time of this narrative and its power on the night of that fatal car crash on August the 31st, 1997. As a 12-year-old boy, he began an attempt to control his narrative, delaying his grief and denying the facts through playing a psychological game of hide and seek for his mother, and all the while trying to find his relationship with his father. Through death and loss, Harry now began to view the narrative being spun about him and his family as a distortion of reality, a betrayal. It could not be trusted, and so he begins to challenge the narrative and grapple with it for control. First, through his own interaction with the monarch, A relationship between father and son, sparse with moments of affection but littered with feelings of regret and repressed emotions, with a continual search to find common ground through which to nurture a deeper connection, a connection for which Harry will forever live in hope for. Secondly, through his interaction with the heir. Sibling rivalry, as he argues with his elder brother over the activities of their press offices, Harry's choice of spouse, and both brothers' ambitions for their roles in Africa. I gave a slight smile at this revelation, as it was not the first time that Europeans had argued over who should have control over the African continent. There are other references to imperialism, such as the Zulu Wars in South Africa and the Koh-i-Noor Diamond of India. But as the heir sought to control the spare sought to control his own narrative, and in doing so, take control of his own destiny. Harry also tries to control his narrative through interaction with the media, portrayed as false prophets, and the courtiers, gatekeepers who the Duke describes using insect and parasitic analogies. Both conspired and succeeded in controlling his narrative throughout his early life. As a 12-year-old walking behind his mother's coffin, being token best man at his own brother's wedding, the idea of the Fab Four, and the agreement to step down as a senior royal. All the time, as he says, attaching my name to words I have never seen, let alone approved of. Part 3, Chapter 76. And finally, Harry attempts to control his narrative through interaction with himself. As the spare, he describes his narrative of being the spare part, the one who is there to maintain the heir and not to replace or outshine him. It is then that we realise that Harry's life is one of sacrifice, not substitution or replacement. He may reject similarities between himself and Hamlet, but Harry's life follows the trajectory of a tragic arc. As the spare, he is stripped bare of royal rank, military titles, patronages, and ultimately security. As he journeys through self-doubt, then self-loathing, self-discovery, and finally toward self-realization and empowerment, he is no longer the spare, but has, like the hummingbird at the end of the book, resurrected to become something else. To be free and to live. In his own words, he asks, will history remember me for the newspaper headlines, or for who I really am? If we refuse to accept the embellished, the manipulated, and the manufactured narratives about the past, then where is the history? Where can we really find it, and in whom, what, or where does it reside? It is not always found in grand pomp and ceremonies, but in the incidentals and anecdotes through which people can relate to, such as driving through the tunnel in Paris to try and understand how his mother's car crash could have happened or could have been prevented. The current Princess of Wales having to change the first letter of her first name from a C to a K in order not to confuse her royal cipher with that of her stepmother-in-law. Harry's father's confession that he regrets not doing enough, not doing more to get help for his son. The heir's disapproval and possible resentment of his sister-in-law. And a king with a passion for music and Shakespeare who performs headstands every day to treat back pain and has been in possession of a teddy bear since his childhood. However, Spare also enables us to look even deeper below the depths of the trivial and incidental if we choose to do so. We can look at the narratives in the press that have their roots in tip-offs from individuals within the royal family. We can look at Harry's unprecedented statement to the press in defence of his then girlfriend and future spouse. We could also look at the details that he shares of his therapy sessions, as well as the untold stories from Harry's own press office staff. We could look at the Sandringham Summit and Harry's decision to step back as a senior royal. And finally, the unexplored parallels between Harry and his great-aunt, Princess Margaret, and their pathology, the nature of their own suffering, as Spares. The British monarchy is still at the heart of how our society is structured and is central to the historical glory as well as the psychological pathology of our country. The institution has often been referred to and perceived by many as the country's moral compass, in that we look to this institution or the monarch themselves for a certain degree of stability, clarity and direction. However, should we also expect this stability, clarity and direction in how to interpret their actions as historical sources, or is the embellishment and manipulation to be accepted as central to interpreting the past? We should ask, then, at what cost should we preserve the monarchy? And if so, how high a price are we willing to pay? Is the acceptance of embellishment and manipulation in historical narratives brought on by intrusion of the press and family feuds an indication of not only Britain's moral decay, but also its moral decline? If you liked this podcast, then stay on this listening platform and check out my other podcast episodes related to this one, such as Long to Reign Over Us, the prelude and the main act, and An Open Letter to King Charles III, all from the second season. And don't forget what I like to call the heart and soul of the Stories to be Told movement, my stories or poetic narratives, Caribbean Wind, Caribbean Rush, Knights at the Round Table, the Berlin Conference 1884, and Gone with the Wind, Macmillan's Speech for Change, are all available on the website in both Kindle and paperback formats. And also the publication of the latest 4 titles. If you want to find out more, just visit storiestobetold.com and check out the learning journeys for The Journey's End Giving Back Hong Kong, Bite from the Big Apple, a story for New York, Hope for Zimbabwe, Arise the Phoenix, and A Story for South Africa. Well, it feels like only yesterday that we began 2023, and look, February is already here. I hope you're all working towards your goals in realising your aspirations and dreams for the year ahead. If you've visited the promotions page on the website recently, you'll notice the monthly giveaways that we have for this year. As with last year, I will be selecting one lucky person each month from my email list to receive some free merch or a copy of a poetic narrative. And for this month, February, it's a copy of Bite from the Big Apple, a story for New York, to celebrate Black History Month in the US and African Heritage Month in Canada. If you'd like to purchase your own copy, the link is in the show notes, as well as a link to my first newsletter. If you're on my email list, you would have certainly received it by now, with info about African Heritage Month and my nomination for Authoress of the Year 2022 with Aspiring Authors magazine. The link for the newsletter is also in the show notes. Now, if you're not a part of the email list, what are you waiting for? Visit storiestobetold.com and sign up, where you can opt in and receive your free samples of my first 4 titles. It's the only way to enter the draw for a chance to win a giveaway, as well as receiving my monthly newsletter. And finally, remember that you can also send me an audio message on the SpeakPipe link, which is also in the show notes. So don't be shy and don't be a stranger. Feel free to like, follow and share us on social media when you visit the website. Just click on whichever social media link you would like to follow us on. And as always, it is a pleasure and a privilege to share my learning journey with you in this podcast series, and I encourage you to either begin or continue your own, because history is a matter of fact or perspective. I'm Tracy DW, and this is a Stories to be Told podcast. Stay safe, stay well, stay blessed for 2023. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you on the next page.